Over the last couple of weeks, we've learned some fairly significant protocol as we've sat glued next to our TV. So in order to observe protocol, and then when I arrived, when I was invited to speak here, and I thought, well, okay, got up, put on green this morning because it's a conference of greenies. And then I said, no, it's better to disrobe in front of the MEC, but unfortunately she's not here. So, because that would be something unique. But I thought, let's go big. So, here we go. I thought it might be topical. And I suppose the words that resonate in my mind are almost beautiful in its brutality. I mean, that is something, where have we ever heard that before? Anyway, thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here. As it was Joe's instruction, absolutely no PowerPoint. I find myself in a very privileged position. And I really don't mean privilege in the context of being a nearly retired white man with a beautiful young wife and an expensive mountain bike. Or is it the expensive wife and the beautiful mountain bike? I'm not quite sure how this all works. But seriously, I'm privileged in the context of what my job affords me. So for 1 minute, I'm operating across sectors. I'm talking to business. The next minute, I'm talking to government. It's across disciplines. I'm talking to social scientists and ecologists. Across societal groups. One day a traditional leader, the next day a commercial farmer. Across functions. A researcher, a regulator, a practitioner, an implementer, and across geographies. I've been fortunate to travel, so both locally and internationally, I work across those. So the scientists even have a name for someone like me. Sorry, it's not an old fart, okay? It's a boundary spanner, someone who just works across a whole bunch of disciplines. And the other fortunate thing is that I've had time in the game. And specifically, over the last 5 years, and actually over the last couple of weeks, over the last 5 years, I've been part of a science program at UKZN looking at ecological infrastructure in the Umgeni River Basin. I'm part of the Umgeni Ecological Infrastructure Partnership. 2 weeks ago, we had this wonderful ecological infrastructure in Daba at Matatiele. The world came to Matatiele. It was absolutely amazing. And we're about to embark on a major landscape restoration and conservation project in the Upper Mkomas. And this sort of gives me the opportunity to observe, to learn, and also to pontificate about what I've learned. So now I'm going to pontificate a little about ecological infrastructure with you. And really, I'm only the messenger. That's what I am. And I promised the EI in Daba that I'd bring some of the key messages back here so that we can take the messages forward. I'm going to talk around 7 themes. Firstly, the nature for water security, which is the topic of my presentation. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the nature of investment. I'm going to talk about social and learning processes. I'm going to talk about scale, getting big, the nature of nature and hard engineering, and then I'm going to briefly talk about governance and leadership. Now, if we talk about nature for water security to this audience here, it's an absolute no-brainer. If we chop down wattle, we're going to get more water to use somewhere else. We all know that. But if I want to quote 2 highly esteemed researchers, Douglas Crooks and James Blichnout, and they said this year: restoration can no longer be considered as merely a cost item on an expenditure account of a company or government, but truly an indispensable investment in the future of both people and the planet. They analyzed 35 restoration projects, and that was the conclusion they came to. The other lesson for me out of that statement is how scientists, these scientists, in one great leap, can take science into policy, and we need to learn from that. They've gone out there and they've said it, and we need to take that message forward. So, what do our natural systems, our soils, our indigenous vegetation, rivers, streams, wetlands, what do they do to improve water security? I'm not going to go over the detail, but I want to pick up 2 points that I think are very interesting. Dr. Dave Clark, this was like a big aha moment for me. I know that we store about 800 million cubic meters of water in our dams in the Umgeni catchment. So I asked him, okay, our surface soils down to 1 meter, what do they store? 1.6 billion cubic meters. The soil storage capacity of the Umgeni is double the dam volume capacity in the catchment. So obviously that is critically important. The other little gem I actually picked up this morning, I was at a seminar at the university, and that is that, and this is from the World Bank, is that water contamination, the stuff that ecological infrastructure can fix, has the potential to reduce economic growth by up to 1/3. So there is a fundamental positive impact if our ecological infrastructure, our nature, is intact. But coming out of my other experiences, there is another lesson which I don't think we've learned yet. And that for us, it's nature for water security is a no-brainer. But for most people, it is completely not understood. So when we get bored shouting out the message, we really have to continue to do so. Because the world out there, particularly in leadership positions, have really no idea of the link between ecological infrastructure and water security. Moving on from that, which is the central core, I want to chat about the nature of investment. Okay. Let's first talk about money. Okay. We really need a return on our financial investment, but it really, whose stick is that? It really only makes sense if the value of the water that you're securing is recognized and priced correctly. And some of you have read my articles, so this is not news to you. But just to summarize, we did a little analysis, I think it was 3 years ago, and we worked out that it would cost about 250 million rand to remove the wattles from the Umgeni River Basin. Okay, remove all the wattles, 250 million rand. And that would provide you with just over 7 million cubic meters of water. Now, if you price that water at what we pay, about 20 rand a cubic meter, then you get about annually, gross, about 144 million rand a year. That's a wonderful return on the investment, even if you halve that for the cost of purifying the water. If you use the Umgeni water price, which is around 6 rand a cubic meter, you're still going to get 42 million rand gross return annually from the sale of that water that comes in. Still a really good investment. But then, if you price it at the raw water price of 1.63 cents a cubic meter, that's 40 rand for an Olympic-sized swimming pool, by the way, you're going to get 117,000 rand total return. That is an investment of a return of 0.05%. So the clear policy message, which people are beginning to listen to in Treasury and in the Department of Water and Sanitation, is that we need fundamental pricing reform to make the investment in ecological infrastructure worthwhile. So we have to do that. There are many ways of picking up on securing a financial investment. We can go to Treasury, we can go to tariffs, we can establish a water fund, we can combinations of many. But really, the bottom line in all this is where there is a lot of revenue being generated, a lot of revenue which, like in our catchment, is happening. So Umgeni Water, turnover 2.4 billion rand a year from water sales. eThekwini, lots of revenue. There you can build into those revenue streams the systems for actually getting catchment management happening. And Umgeni Water is already beginning to do this by just including it as an operational part of their budget. If we move to places like the Mzimvubu, it's a little more difficult. There's no one downstream paying for that water. So what we have to do is we actually have to look at where the benefits happen at source, where there's improved rangeland management, improved sale of cattle, that kind of things. So it depends where you are as to where are the mechanisms of financial investment. But in order to secure that financial investment, you can't just invest in the hard things. You have to invest in human and social capital, in developing the capacity of the custodians of the land, the managers and the operators, so that they can learn and understand. We need a lot more skilled people in the room. We're working on that in our sphere, and as Joe kindly said, it is one of my passions and priorities going forward. Moving on to the social process. Many individuals, I suppose myself to a certain extent included, tend to be quite critical of some of the social processes that are playing themselves out. There seems to be never-ending meetings, dialogues, conferences, symposia, training courses, and some, particularly those that don't have a clear purpose and a clear direction, are a drain on the system. But if they are focused and they are purposeful, they are absolutely essential, and we need to make considerable investment in our social processes. And we also really need to recognize that a lot of these processes that we're engaged in, they take quite a lot of time. Many of you here are members of the Umgeni Ecological Infrastructure Partnership. It's been going for 6 years. It, to a large extent, is really only beginning to gain major traction right now. So it's been a 6-year process to get to the point it is, and it is doing well. The Mzimvubu Catchment Partnership Program, also been going for 6 years. They dived into the action before they dove into the research. That is also doing superbly well, but it has taken them 6 years to get to a substantial scale. So we have to recognize and we have to have time in the game to make these things happen. The other point I want to make here is that there's always this ongoing argument about, well, does practice inform research or research inform practice? Guys, we're in it together, and we have to walk this road together. So research and practice need to walk side by side. Just finally, in the context of the social processes, just mentioning innovation. We've seen the technical innovation all around us. Joe knows what digital means now. But really, I think the main innovation going forward needs to happen in the social space. How we share information more effectively, how we interact, how we act together, how we generate knowledge, and finally, how we accrue wisdom in this space. Just moving on briefly to the issue of scale. Most of us are scientists and practitioners who are comfortable really working at a fairly small scale, in detail, with small sums of money. That's how we are wired. We also assume that if we do something at small scale in a case study, we can scale it up to the level of a catchment. But I think it was someone from the Department of Environment Affairs NRM program said, you know, we're clearing these alien invasive plants out of the Umgeni, but we're still going backwards. We're just going backwards more slowly because we're not engaging at the scale that we have to engage. And when I think of what we have to do over the next 10 years, which is effectively the restoration of the Upper Umkomaas catchment to protect an investment in Smithfield Dam of 30 billion rand, and probably 50 by the time the 10-year comes up, we need to completely adjust our mindsets. We've got 2,000 square kilometers of an upper catchment, much of it in a fairly poor state. And it's not going to be just about filling in big dongas. It's going to be about fundamental socio-economic support for the people who live there so that they can improve the condition of their own land. This is going to be fundamental. So we have to really change the way we think about scale. Moving on to, we talk about nature, ecological infrastructure, and we talk about hard infrastructure, our engineering stuff. And clearly, up until relatively recently, it's been the dams, the hard infrastructure, the reticulation works that have dominated our landscape physically and our mindsets. And we really do need to move towards a more nuanced approach and recognize the ability of nature to support ecological infrastructure. And I'm careful in the way I choose my words there, because it's not an either-or. It's together. We've got to have our hard infrastructure. But together with our ecological infrastructure, we can go forward far more effectively and far more sustainably. Second to last point, governance. We have been, for the last 20 years, particularly as it relates to water security, and we've been in a governance vacuum and in a steadily increasing governance vacuum. No catchment management agencies. Okay. And everybody has bemoaned this the whole time. Well, I think it's more of an opportunity than a constraint, because it's meant we've had to do things differently. It's meant that we have established the Umgeni Ecological Infrastructure Partnerships. We have a whole bunch of local level committees. We have catchment management fora that are operating. And I really believe that the vacuum has forced us to operate slightly differently. It is messy. Coordination is not always perfect. But ultimately, it is a bottom-up approach, which is, for me, the democratization of water resource management. And I actually think it's quite a good idea. So while the CMAs might have been ideal, I think what is evolving is likely to be more sustainable than a top-down, nationally imposed CMA on our system. Leadership. We recognize that the state is struggling to provide coherent leadership for a number of different reasons. But what we are also seeing is that individuals and organizations from both the state and civil society are stepping into the leadership vacuum. Is anyone here from Umgeni Water? No. Anyway, their CEO, Tami Shongwe, he said to Minister Sisulu we will engage in catchment management until you provide us with a directive to stop. And I think that is a profound statement, that Umgeni Water has decided in its own interests it has to engage in catchment management and is leading the way on the Upper Kamas and in other places. So that is wonderful. Locally here, we have NGOs, government, private sector, and researchers coming forward to lead. At the Ecological Infrastructure in Indaba at Matatiele, we had the likes of Environment and Rural Solutions, WWF, Meet Naturally, Conservation South Africa, in there providing really good strategic and operational direction. And this was, for me, was absolutely profound. They had 3 traditional leaders presenting in the most articulate and persuasive manner I have heard in a long time. And the other thing, the kicker in all this, is 2 of those traditional leaders, do you know who they were? They were women. And that, for me, was absolutely wonderful. So that's just a quick glance of the main messages that many of us are taking out of this ongoing conversation around water for nature. I want to thank the organizers in that for providing the opportunity, not just for me, but for me just to be a mouthpiece for many of our interests. And I think that, like the Springboks, we are developing a team. We are developing a set of partnerships that is just ready to take us forward into the future. Thanks very much.